Hi, my name is Sean Walker, and I'm a Principal Product Success Architect and part of the Ranger team here at ServiceNow. Today I'm going to be talking to you about software entitlements. So today's video, we are going to talk and define a little bit what software entitlements are. We're going to talk about the process of gathering those software entitlements. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the process of on-premise software entitlements and then a little bit of the difference for SaaS subscription software entitlements. So what is a software entitlement? So software entitlements represent that point-in-time purchase of a right to use the software. So when you purchase an entitlement, you don't actually own the software itself. You're purchasing a right to use that software. Software entitlements refer to the asset itself, and it represents the type, the quantity, the cost, and the right to use. Software entitlements can also be referred to as software licenses in a lot of cases. So software entitlements, they define the license details of purchased software. So it's important when you're gathering those entitlements that you capture details like the PPN, which is the publisher part number, the cost, the quantity, etc. They also track the licenses that you've been allocated to those users or systems. So allocating entitlements really helps the software asset manager validate that that user or that system is actually approved to use that entitlement. Software entitlements are associated with software models. So it's really important that you ensure the entitlement is associated with the correct software model. Incorrect or incorrectly configured software models can have a really big impact on your overall compliance position. Entitlements are stored in the ALM license table, which can be a little bit confusing since there is another table named ALM entitlements. But that's where the system uses to store those allocations of the entitlements. Gathering entitlements information is a really critical activity that really shouldn't be overlooked or underestimated. Most organizations' procurement it's often decentralized. Purchase order information is really hard. It's like stored in spreadsheets, or it's not maintained at all, or it's maintained by different departments. Entitlement data is usually spread across the organization, and especially in those companies that have different legal entities or multiple subsidiaries. It's really common to have entitlement information for user software kind of spread everywhere. A lot of users might go out and they might expense software just so they can get their job done, but then you don't have visibility into that entitlement data. You don't have that procurement information for that entitlement. So unless there's like some sort of enterprise agreement in place, it's really hard to determine your compliance status for a product without really knowing what you're entitled to use. So since collecting the entitlement data can be really time consuming, it's important for the relevant teams to really be working on gathering the entitlements in advance so that they have enough time to track down all of these entitlements. So what are the steps involved in gathering these entitlement data? So the first step is to prioritize or create a prioritized list of publishers or specific products that your organization is most concerned with. Some of the things you can ask yourself to help prioritize these publishers or products are there any upcoming contracts or subscription renewals? So maybe you've got a true upcoming, maybe you've got a big contract negotiation or small contract negotiation coming up that you need to focus on. So that would become a priority. What publishers does the organization spend the most on? That's a big thing for most organizations, is they try and track down and prioritize what they spend the most on. Now, if you're just getting out and started in SAM, that can be kind of daunting because a lot of the times you're spending money on those big publishers, and those big publishers can be very complex. So, but a lot of organizations are going to want to focus on those publishers. What products are most critical to the organization's performance? Maybe there's specific software packages that are really critical to maintain business. And then say, for example, if they're a subscription software and that subscription, you don't renew it in time and that software dies and your users can't use it, that could be really critical for the performance of the organization. The next thing you're going to want to do once you've got that prioritized list is determine if there's any contracts for these publishers. Contracts are generally negotiated by other teams other than asset management, like vendor management or procurement management teams. So you're going to want to have a really good working relationship with those teams and develop internal processes to ensure that, the ITAM team is going to get the information they need about those software contracts in their hands when that contract is signed. What you can do after that is you're going to want to look for procurement information, procurement and that invoice data. So the big thing is a purchase order, right, shows the intent to purchase a software, whereas an invoice actually proves that a purchase was made. So there's a big difference there. Just getting a PO or a PR isn't really going to be enough. You need to actually see that invoice to say, yeah, that purchase request went through. They generated an invoice, we paid that invoice, so yes, we do own the right to use this software. So you're going to want to get the procurement information for that base contract, right? And then you're going to also want to make sure that you're getting any procurement information for purchases of that publisher or product since that contract was signed. So if the original contract was signed a year ago, you're going to want to get that purchasing information, but anything else that may have been purchased up to this point in time in the year, and get that procurement information as well. And that's really going to help you establish that baseline using the original contractual information and then all those subsequent purchases, and really set that date and time and that baseline for that publisher or product. After that, if you're still having trouble trying to find some of this procurement information, you can actually go directly to your vendor reseller, or maybe even in select cases, go directly to the publisher for this purchase information. So some companies can't find the procurement information, right? So what can you do? Well, hopefully if your organization purchases from a reseller, you could go to that reseller and say, hey, can you send me a list of all the software I've purchased in the last 5 years with the invoice data, etc.? And that's a good way. And those resellers should be able to provide you that information. It's work for them. They may not want to do it, but they should be able to provide you that. And then a worst case scenario, and I wouldn't recommend doing this before you've exhausted all the rest of these options, is you can actually go directly to the publisher and say, hey, publisher, what have I purchased in the past 5 years? Now that does carry some risk, right? Because you're basically telling the publisher that I don't know what I've purchased, so I don't know if I'm compliant. So I would always say, go to a publisher direct as a last resort, right? If you have a good handle on things and just want to confirm, okay, maybe that's okay. So if they do come and decide to audit you, that you have your ducks in a row. So now let's talk a bit about on-premise software entitlements. What do you do once you've obtained that contractual information? So what do I do now? So I'm going to want to create those entitlements in ServiceNow based off that contractual data. So this is going to establish, as I mentioned, that baseline for the product. So as of this date, I had a contract for this many entitlements, and I'm going to put those entitlements in the system and establish that baseline. From there, I'm going to use that procurement and invoice data to either manually create or import all that procurement data since that baseline date when the contract was entered. And that's going to really help me get up to date on all of those purchases that I've made since the original contract date. So once all the entitlement information has been created, you're going to want to perform a reconciliation. So you're going to want to run an individual publisher reconciliation just to see what happened with all this entitlement information I have entered in the system. So that reconciliation process is going to reconcile the entitlements against the installations. It's going to apply the default license metrics and use rights, and then could give you that kind of starting compliance position. From there, you're going to want to take a look at the software model results, right? So you're going to do that by going to the license usage workspace and review that publisher or product and determine, hey, are those products compliant? Do I need to do anything else? So once you've reviewed the model results, you're likely going to have to update the license metrics. So you're going to want to review those license metrics that were applied to the entitlement or the software model, depending on what was negotiated in the contract, or if the entitlement maybe was created with a PPN or not. Those license metrics may need to be updated. You're going to want to review things like downgrade and upgrade rights, maintenance start and end dates, suite components, if it's a suite, and look at those inference percentages. And maybe look at those, minimum cores per VM, minimum cores per processor, etc. Those different license metrics that may be required specific for that entitlement. And make sure they're right, depending on what you've negotiated in your contract. From there, you're going to want to look at creating allocations for approved or authorized users or devices. This is going to help the asset managers determine if software has been installed in their environment without following the proper request and approval process, right? Because you're going to create those allocations for the baseline. And then after that, when the reconciliation runs, you're going to see what might be unallocated. And those might show up as unlicensed. So you're going to be able to take those appropriate remediation actions on these unapproved installations if you've done your allocations of the entitlements. So the next thing you're going to want to take a look at is you're going to want to review the discovery model normalizations for that publisher or product. So when discovery models are not fully normalized, that means they're missing information for the publisher or the product or the version. So these models likely won't be mapped back to the software model correctly. So if discovery models that don't map back to that software model properly, they're not going to be considered during the reconciliation process. So that's going to really make your compliance position inaccurate. So you want to make sure for that publisher or product has fully normalized or manually normalized with all those three fields, so you're going to get that full count of software installations out there. And the next step is, you could look at potentially needing to put in install conditions or consumption rules if they're required. Software entitlements and software use rights can have either restrictions or benefits when certain conditions are met. So you're going to want to make sure that's applied. So software install conditions allow you to specify which conditions need to be met in order for an installation to be included or excluding during the reconciliation process. A common example of that is making sure that we're only consuming entitlements for production equipment and not development or test. And you may also want to apply consumption rules. So maybe you've purchased an entitlement, but you've purchased it very specifically so that the HR department will consume 10 entitlements or can only consume 10 entitlements, and the finance department can only consume 15 entitlements, and the IT department is only allowed 2, right? And you can apply those consumption rules to the entitlements as well, depending on how your environment is set up. And once you've done all that and you've run through your reconciliation a couple times and you're confident with that, you're going to want to take a look at, are there any entitlements there, or are there still any unlicensed installations or unlicensed products for that publisher showing up in the license usage workspace? So if that's the case, now you're going to want to go back and do that entitlement gathering process again to say, okay, I must have missed gathering entitlements for these products that I just don't have the entitlement information for. So again, you're going to want to work on those entitlements that are part of your contract, get those working, and then see what falls out and see if you can find that additional entitlement information you may need, or make a decision on what you should be doing with the stuff that you don't have entitlement information for. So that's typically the process for on-premise software. Now let's talk about SaaS subscription software, which is a tiny bit different in the way you want to think about approaching it. The first steps in gathering the entitlement information, those are all the same. But the first step you're going to want to do when you're talking about SaaS subscriptions is make sure that you're creating that integration profile. So creating a direct integration profile into the publisher's portal is not only going to import the user subscription and usage data, it's also going to create the software models if some don't exist. So those software models are the ones that you're going to want to be associating with the software entitlements so that you can accurately report on those compliance positions. I would recommend, if a direct integration profile exists, use that out-of-the-box integration profile. They're designed to import all the data that's required to perform reconciliation for that specific publisher. So an alternative, though, is you think about using an SSO integration, which can be considered if you're using Okta or Azure to provide authentication to SaaS software, or maybe SaaS software that doesn't have a direct integration profile available. So that's a really good way to get some usage and software subscription information into the environment as well. You could also create a custom integration when there's no direct or SSO integration available. That is definitely an option. You just have to assume the technical debt that's going to come along with creating and maintaining that custom integration. So once the integration's been completed, you're going to want to review the software models that were automatically created. You're going to want to compare these models with the information you've gathered from your contractual and procurement data, just like you did on the on-premise. And then you're going to want to begin entering the entitlements or gathering any missing entitlement data. So you're going to want to take a look at the models that were created automatically, and that's the difference, right? And then create your entitlements. So again, that's the next step, is you're going to want to create the entitlement directly from the software model that was created by the integration, rather than from the entitlement or the bulk entitlement process. And that's going to really make sure that the entitlements are correctly associated with the software model to where all those subscriptions have been assigned. It's possible when you create an entitlement with a PPN or bulk import that software model that gets created might not be exactly what was created by that direct integration. And that can leave you with some duplicate software models and maybe the entitlement being tied to the wrong one. So creating your entitlements from the software model that was created for the direct integration is a pretty safe way to make sure you're going to start seeing the right consumption for that entitlement. So when direct integrations are configured, they're going to automatically create a reclamation rule. So you're going to want to review that reclamation rule, and you're going to want to make sure that those rules meet your company's policy about software usage, right? They may be default looking at consumption older than 3 months, but you may say 6 months or maybe 1 month. So you're going to want to look at those pre-created reclamation rules to make sure they line up with what your company has stated in its policy. So you're going to then want to go through and you're going to want to repeat that step for every model that was created through that integration profile. And some may only have 1 or 2 models that were created, and some may have a ton. If you think of like M365 or Adobe, there's usually a lot of models that are created and have subscriptions assigned to them that you'll want the entitlements for. And then there's some that, only have a couple of different software models. So you're going to want to repeat that steps of creating your entitlements off the models kind of over and over until you get them done for all of your models. And then last but not least, of course, you're going to want to review those software model results again. So you're going to want to go to the license usage workspace, and you're going to want to review that specific publisher or product results. And that's pretty much the entitlement gathering and process you're going to want to think about as you start to mature out and start to get into software asset management. So if you want more information on this particular thing, there's a couple of good articles on the ServiceNow product documentation site. One is Create Entitlements in Workspace, and it takes you through the basic process of creating an entitlement. So you can definitely go to the ServiceNow product documentation page and look all through there. There's lots of information on entitlements. We also have our YouTube channel, in the ServiceNow community, and we've got a playlist that's called Ask a Ranger Software Asset Management. And we're creating some related videos about, again, this video, which is gathering and creating software entitlements. But I'm also doing videos on creating entitlements using the guided playbook, creating entitlements manually, and bulk creating software entitlements using the entitlement import feature. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this useful, and good luck on your SAM journey and getting those entitlements into your system.